forum. And welcome. I'm just going to check with Robin that we are quora. Robin, are you able to identify if we're quora yet?
Not quite.
We'll just hang on a few more moments for people to join us.
Hi, Simon.
Yes, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. For some reason, it's Sue Seeley. I'm actually Sue Seeley from East Somerset Federation, and for some reason, my daughter's name has come up on the screen. So we might be Cora, Robin, because I'm actually here.
No, that's useful for me identified if you need to speak as well, Sue. So thank you for that.
Yeah, sorry, I am in disguise. It's so you don't know it's me. That's what it is, really.
We are still one short for Cora, Sue, but thank you for confirming that, Sue.
Right, no worries, Robin. I'm going to switch off and take the kettle off now. Thank you.
That does now make us Cora, Simon.
Brilliant. Okay, well, let's begin. So first of all, welcome everybody, welcome observers and any members of the public. The agenda was published on the 24th of September and the agenda pack is available on the council's website. A supplementary paper was circulated on the 24th of September. Can I ask please if we can, and you all have, but turn off videos, put yourselves on mute. Schools forum members please only use the video and microphones when speaking. This will help with background noise, call quality and anything disrupting the meeting. When I invite a member to speak, please clearly state who you are for the benefit of all to help identify who's speaking. If referring to a report, please refer to page numbers from the published agenda pack to assist all present in finding the appropriate information. Can forum members only please use the meeting chat function? It's just for the purpose of the meeting, primarily to indicate to myself, chair, that you wish to speak. On that, you might see I'm logged on twice. It's so I can see the chat on one screen and the hands up on the other, but clearly we don't have any decisions for vote today, but I hope we'll only vote once in that circumstance. Anything in the chat will not be included in the minutes, so please can you raise your hand function to indicate that you wish to speak. There is a facility in Microsoft Teams under the ellipsis button called Turn on Live Captions, which provides subtitles on the screen. The meeting will be recorded as with other public meetings of the council. The recording will be made available following the meeting on the Schools Forum website. Please, to help us the flow of the meeting, we'll be using a single slide pack to take us through the agenda. Robin, could you please list any apologies?
I've had apologies from Deb Loveridge, Nicola Darby, Melissa Singer and Katie Boys.
Thank you. Katie's one of the new members who we've got today. So we've got Tom Filer, Katie Boys, Matt Hill, Naomi Philp, and Matt Hill. Naomi and myself have been renominated to forum. Please, can I ask Tom Filer and Matt Hill if you'd like to introduce yourselves? If we start with Tom.
Hello, I'm Tom.
That's great. And Matt?
Matt isn't on the call at the moment, Simon, but
Okay.
I have noticed we have had our new member from the Somerset Parent Carer Forum join as well, Ruth.
Okay, Ruth, if you'd like to identify yourself.
Hi everyone, Ruth Hobbs, I'm here from Somerset Parent Care Forum, so I'll be the representative from the forum on Schools Forum.
Brilliant. And in line with the most current records I have, and this might be now out of date, Robin, but we currently have vacancies for 2 secondary academy reps, 3 primary academy reps and 1 early years rep, and work is underway with the relevant groups associations to recruit those to positions as soon as possible. Okay, this brings us to item 3 on the agenda, which is declarations of interest. Please can I invite any members to declare any interests? Okay, in the absence of that, we will move to item 4, which is submitted public questions. No public questions were received by the deadline of 5 on the 27th of September 2024, which brings us to item 5, minutes of the previous meeting held on the 19th of June 2024. These are for agreement, so any issues relating to the minutes? Okay, I have one item, and I'm not sure if this fits. This is Simon. I have one item, and I'm not sure if it fits. It's regarding the vote around the FMS that was LA maintained schools only, and I guess this is something we'll need to pick up through forum. But I received, as a head of an academy, I received an email regarding charges for in-year admissions, and there is significant cost to those in-year admissions for schools, running to, in some cases, tens of thousands of pounds. And in that email, it made a link to the fact that Forum had voted for the change in that academies were now going to be charged. And I personally don't see it in the minutes. I don't recall that as an explicit agenda item, and I personally can't find that decision in the FMS document. So I'm just raising that as an issue related to something where Forum's being quoted as having made a decision. I don't know if any of the LA reps are able to help with that. Amelia.
Yeah, so that did not arise in relation to the FMS when it came to Forum. So it came under the Central School Services block, because that was previously funded from that block. So as Forum was considering the expenditure on all funding lines in relation to that, that was one of the areas that was removed from the Central School Services block a decision last year, simply because of the pressures with reduction in historic commitments. We're having to reduce the central funding in all areas. So that's where it wasn't related to the FMS when it came to Schools Forum, Simon.
No, that's fine. And do you know which meeting? Maybe we can identify at some point. I'll talk to you elsewhere about which meeting that came up, because I know I personally have, I don't get many communications around the actions of Forum, and that was one where I've had significant interest around, Forum making that decision, and to the extent to which Forum knew they were making that decision.
We can certainly find that. I'll try and dig that out for you, Simon.
No, that's fine. Thank you. In which case, that was my only item from that meeting. Okay, in which case we will go to item 6, DMP consultation on top-ups and banding. And can I invite Amelia, please, to present and highlight key points?
Hi everyone, I'm aware that some colleagues will have been party to some of the briefings that we have, where we've shared some of these overviews of the consultation. Consultation went live on this 9th of September and is currently open. It closes on the 21st of October and would encourage everyone here, your organisations and your contacts to respond to the consultation. Is someone clicking on the slides? I haven't got access to those, so I might just need to, thank you, just click through the rest of it. Members of Schools Forum are very aware of the pressures on the high needs block, both in Somerset and across the country. And our work with schools, early years providers and colleges has made it very clear that it's the ability of mainstream schools to cope with the level of need in the classroom, in schools, early years providers and colleges, which is linked to many of the challenges across the county and to the financial pressure in the system. So, and I just found this personally quite helpful to just think about the challenges that we have in the county and how they relate to pressure on mainstream schools. And if you can see the list on the slide, every single one of those ramifications which can emerge due to pressure on mainstream schools is really quite significant and is present in Somerset at this moment in time. We are one of the highest excluding and suspending areas in the country. for children with SEND. Our suspensions and exclusions are not higher than other areas for children who don't have SEND. So SEND is absolutely at the heart of our high levels of suspension and exclusion. We have placements breaking down, and that's not just in mainstream. We have placements breaking down in special schools and in the independent sector. But when placement breakdown happens, the most common outcome is that there is a higher cost placement that arises from that. We have a sharp increase in pupils who are severely absent from school. We don't have good data on this, but colleagues in economic development have taken it away to see if we can develop our data picture in terms of the impact on parents and parents leaving employment because their children are not able to consistently attend school. We do know that some families have indicated that they no longer feel they're able to care for their children and as a result have come into the care system. And we've also seen schools judged inadequate where they have simply been no longer able to deliver quality of education because of the pressure that they have come under. If you look at that in totality, it is a really, it's an interconnected system, but the consequences are really significant and severe. You can move to the next slide. So the consultation is about understanding the role that funding plays in creating a system that offers both challenge and support. And we know from the evidence that a high challenge, high support system is the strongest in any public service. But one of the things that, and I think is kind of close to the hearts of the members of this group, is that funding is not everything, but it is important. And we have certainly understood, and colleagues have been asking for some time for us to consider the role that funding plays. So the consultation looks at funding and looks at associated issues. Next slide. You could just click through. Yeah, thanks. I think the animations on this will make it a bit tricky. So the central proposal in the consultation is that top-ups be equalised across mainstream schools and special schools. And the analysis that we have done, which is in the consultation, shows that the costed plans, which is our current mechanism for uprating the amount of funding that a mainstream school receives for a child with an education, health and care plan, a costed plan on average equates to the current rate for special schools, which is about mainstream schools are funded about 1/3 of the special school rate. So the proposal is to equalise that. And we think about the dynamic of how the system works. Obviously, mainstream schools can access a higher level of funding, and they currently do that through a costed plan. But if we're thinking about the dynamic, that both puts operational pressure on schools because of the labour involved, and that's the labour, the work involved in creating a costed plan, both for schools and for the local authority, is very, very high. But it also creates financial anxiety and pressure in the system because there's the uncertainty around securing the funding. There is the lag time when that funding has not been processed. There's some of the administrative problems the local authorities had in getting funding out to schools, and just a general sense of financial anxiety and uncertainty is unhelpful. And diminishing potentially the sense of a strong, sustainable and stable system to meet all forms of need. Next slide. And obviously a particular concern to this group, even if we've identified that potentially mainstream schools are being underfunded, there's a question about the implementation if we were to make changes. And the total cost from our calculations of implementing equivalent top-ups across state mainstream and state special is £10.3 million. The high needs budget, as we all know, is already significantly overspent. So the proposal is to try and phase in equivalent funding over a period of time. And the consultation asks for views on these specific groups of children, starting with costed plans, then bringing in children who have new education healthcare plans, focusing on phased transfer, which is a key moment when there's a lot of interaction between schools and local authorities about individual pupils, and then securing some central services where we have pupils with specific services, sometimes quite intensive services, named in their plans, and where we know that at the moment some pupils are not receiving that service because of financial uncertainty. So that's a proposal to try, and it would still mean, and what we are doing at the moment is putting together a business case for the council executive to look at the the challenging decision, because this would be an investor save proposal. We would need to put in more money in some areas than we currently are, and well, specifically we'd need to put more money into mainstream schools. That may seem like a perverse thing to do, but everything that is we're looking at is telling us that actually by putting in more money into that part of the system, we will see a decrease in demand in some of the higher cost areas of the system. But that is a hypothesis, and there's no guarantee that would be realised. It only just seems logical, and all the evidence is telling us that is the way to go. Next slide. Just a bit more detail and specific proposal around central services. We are regularly having parents make complaints about non-delivery, particularly of occupational therapy and speech and language therapy. One of the reasons for that has been instability around funding and the ability to establish that service that they can draw on. There's also proposals in here around flexible education. We would need to have the latitude to make sure that if we were putting in services, we're establishing things that pupils, schools would need to draw on, that those services exist and that there's a clear and identified way to make sure that they get funded. And so the proposal is that there would be a standard top-up. It would be approximately 2/3 higher than it currently is for mainstream schools. But if there are particular services that couldn't be delivered by the school, that needed external support, that would be identified in advance and would be withheld from that to make sure that that service could be delivered, and those services existed if they were being named in the plan. Next slide. There's quite a lot of detail in the proposal. More detail would be needed if there's backing for this this concept. But one of the things that when we informally consulted with school leaders that they were very clear about, same when we consulting with early years leaders, that it's not all about funding. And that actually if the system and the structures and the support isn't there, with the best will in the world, if you can have cash in the bank, but if you can't buy the right things for it, it doesn't advantage you in terms of securing what children need. So this proposal around flexible education is about using what we have better in a more joined up way, filling in some of the gaps and adopting some principles about what good support looks like. And I think some of the feedback that we've had and some of the dialogue that we've had with providers is a sense that we don't know what we're working towards in terms of a system that would work better. We know that some things really aren't working. We know that there are some serious gaps, but it can be sometimes difficult to visualize where are we trying to get to? What would be better than what we have now? And so this model of provision is an attempt to sketch out a way that we could work that would fill in some of the gaps, would tidy up some of the landscape that can sometimes feel messy or confusing, and give us all a working model to get children who have sometimes crashed out of the education system or have drifted out of the education system to have a clear, confident pathway back into mainstream, or at the very least back into a small group space in a PRU or a special school. Next slide. And bearing in mind your point, Simon, let's be really clear and transparent about what this is consulting on. There is specific details in this consultation about how we operate in the space around exclusion, including financial proposals. The focus of the consultation is proposals to shift our emphasis into preventing exclusion rather than dealing with exclusion after it's happened. And certainly having conversations only in the past few days about how difficult it can be to secure higher level, more intensive support for children where the things that are within the disposal of a school have already been tried. So that's that area of support where there is a ramping up of more intensive or different forms of support that are more effective than things that have been tried and have not worked, is a space that needs to improve, and part of that would relate to the proposals around a model of provision. But equally, the proposal is that that's a quid pro quo, that if we can improve the support that comes before exclusion, that we would then have higher levels of challenge if children were excluded within that context. So I think the proposal is those things need to speak to each other. There needs to be both higher support and higher challenge, with the hope that that high challenge would no longer be relevant, because actually we would be we'd be putting in that support, and it would be more effective to prevent exclusion altogether. I think something that has frequently come up has been about the length of time to secure funding. So there's two proposals in the consultation. One is about access to immediate match funding. And one of the things we learned from the Preventing Exclusion project is that sometimes the most important thing is that money can be agreed on the spot to be spent that day. The proposals around Team Around the Child would include the option for someone from the local authority in that Team Around the Child meeting to agree immediate match funding up to £500 to be matched by the school on the day without any further sign-off required. But also significant level of funding that could be agreed, again, within a short period, to be within the school in full within a month, of up to 12 months funding at band 4. So that's the equivalent of £12,000. And we know, if we think about what intensive support may look like, if a child was going to get intensive support out of their home for 6 weeks, that would be in the region of £6,000. If that was then to be transitioned into another setting or a mix of provision moving back into the school, that's easily another £6,000. The rest of that year, in terms of support within the school, might come from notional. So potentially, it's not unrealistic to consider that intensive support to bring a child back into education would be in the region of 18,000. Of which that could be drawn in very, very quickly and without extensive sign-off. Finally, and one of the things that we are all very mindful of is that we have sometimes situations where things go down to the wire, and not everything can be done with a calm and lengthy lead-in. Sometimes things do come out of nowhere, but that shouldn't be the standard modus operandi. We already have timescales in the calendar. Phase transfer deadline is 15th of November, and school places should be notified by the 15th of February. We know that doesn't always happen, but that is the national deadline. But what that doesn't include is the notifications that don't relate to phases, and that is still a very, very considerable number of children where those conversations can arise at any time. And so the proposal is that there would be a deadline to notify that there was likely to be a request for assessment, for annual review, for a change in placement, so that we were able to plan as a system and have some kind of resolution to questions of sufficiency, with giving us all a reasonable chance to do something about it, because some of these things are coming absolutely down to the wire, and that's not fair for anyone involved. So as from a financial perspective, to be able to confirm funding by a given date so that schools can plan and pupil numbers are, as much as we can, make them confirmed with time to do things like recruit. Final slide. I would love to be able to give you a very, very detailed analysis of exactly how we think the numbers would pan out. We are doing more work on this and looking particularly at the impact that it could have on the high needs budget if we were able to intervene with children in an intensive way, put more money up front, but then not actually require any further funding from an EHCP after that, that could have quite a significant impact on overspending, because we would be able to get in there and make a difference in a child's life without them requiring long-term funding, because actually things have changed, things have improved, and they are back on track. We are looking at behavioural economics, because one of the things that we have identified is that people people's behaviour is what drives the SEND system, whether that is a parent, someone employed by a school or an early years provider, or a child themselves. This is all about how we are behaving. And actually those choices, those individual choices, are aggregating up to financial pressure. So we're focusing on thinking about what do we know from behavioural science, understanding how behaviour drives money. And one of the things that you can see by taking that perspective is that when you look at the SEND system, all of the behavioural kind of pointers and structural elements are pointing in the wrong direction. If we can move it in a different direction, we can enable potentially different choices, different behaviours that result in better outcomes and lower cost. So that's our focus at the moment. We will be including that in the business case for our executive, which is going for a decision on the 4th of November. We will share that once that is complete with Schools Forum, but that's I'll leave that there because that's as far as we've got in terms of fleshing that out at this moment in time. What I would say is we did obviously lots and lots of calculations around the deficit management plan earlier in the year. I think it was really that experience that taught us you need to take a different approach when trying to work out dynamics in human systems, because you can put lots and lots of numbers on things, but actually we're talking about human interactions and people have choices. So we can look at where the children are, but we need to think about all of this complexity and identify what it is we need to change to influence human behaviour so that we can try and influence the overall financial direction. So I'll stop that there, but I'm happy to pick up any questions or reflections on that. No questions? No thoughts? Susan, hi.
Hi, thank you. I wanted to start by saying this is, I think, the most impressive set of consultation materials that I've ever seen. And it's just really powerful stuff. And thanks to all those who've been involved in putting it all together and the briefings and everything all around it. One tiny little request on the back of making that comment is it'd be shocking handy if it was possible to tip Schools Forum members off when something like this has gone live for those of us who are not head teachers. So I've found it and explored all the materials, but it would just be, I wonder if Robin could just tip off those of us who are not head teachers when something like this happens. Could I ask a question that is, it's related to the consultation proposals, but in respect of the proposal number 1. So I understand that you've done a lot of work in looking at the costed plans and to understand that is the real cost in a mainstream school of delivering the provision that's required. What I'm interested in is whether the same degree of analysis has happened with the top-up funding rates that are currently used in special schools to see whether actually you're matching to the right thing and whether there is some logic and that is the real cost of delivering in a special school as compared to a mainstream school. And on the back of that, I'm just interested in how this equalisation pans out in the future, given that for special schools, the place funding doesn't ever go up, and therefore you might have got some sort of equivalence to start with, but then they'll diverge again. So I'm just interested in the sort of parallel side of trying to hold those things together and equal.
Yeah, so I think my overall observation is I don't think that we have previously come at the setting of top-ups from the right angle. So what we need to be doing is we need to be setting top-ups across the piece based on what we know about EHCPs. And I don't think that's the level of analysis that has been applied in setting rates. It's been uprated with inflation or what have you. So I think where we would want to be getting to is, this is not an unknown quantity, what's in EHCPs. And what we wouldn't have been able to do in the past is to draw any conclusions about what it would cost to develop and to pay for an EHCP, because that has had to happen on a very, very individualized basis. One of the associated things that we are looking at, and this ties into the behavioral science approach, is about providing much, much clearer, templated upfront information about the cost of things at the point when an EHCP is first being discussed and devised. Because what we have, we did a range of process mapping, what it became clear was there's a really lovely conversation that happens up front where everything is possible. It's very, very supportive. Everyone feels wonderful about that conversation and go through this. And I've spoken to parents who said, I don't know, I was really surprised. Everyone was saying EHCPs were, this is a terrible process. I was having a wonderful time. It was all lovely. And then we got to the placement and then it got nasty. And it was, and because actually none of the financial conversations were happening until the very end, when suddenly the complete insufficiency and all the financial realities came to bear very, very rapidly. So what we need to do is to bring that right up front. So we have full financial transparency, both about what is realistically available from a sufficiency perspective, what the pros and cons are of different provision. And we have some very impassioned views from some very eloquent parents saying, just because that independent school is very expensive doesn't mean it's going to be good for your child. And, you know, we know lots and lots of parents who've been desperately disappointed because they have fought and fought and fought and fought to get a very expensive placement that their child has then not attended or not progressed in. So thus that kind of conversation needs to come up front, but our ability to say, and I think what, just drawing attention as well, one of the things that is, I think, has been under-discussed within the county has been the value for everyone of EHCPs defining things that will not just benefit one child. And having that conversations openly with parents to say, if part of your child's EHCP is paying for all staff training, your child will benefit, but so will everyone else. And actually that's good value for money because many different EHCPs can come together to pay for that kind of provision. It's good, it's efficient, but also it has extra value. So I think bringing all of that up front so people can be very reflective from the earliest conversations about the cost of everything, the value of things, and what choices we have and don't have, that we can't invent things that don't exist, but we can maximize what is available. That I think will help parents to navigate this space and to but through that as well, if it's a little bit more templated, you know, there's only that many things you can buy, to be honest, to support a child with additional needs, that we would be able to have records about what is sitting in each EHCP and what that costs, so that we would be able to each year look at the cost of AP, look at the cost of TAs, look at the cost of speech and language therapy, look at the cost of staff training, and to be able to pull that out of the collection of 5,000 EHCPs and appropriately rate the top up based on what children have actually been identified as needing in terms of provision in those EHCPs. Now, I absolutely cannot promise that will be available, you know, from the 1st of January, for example, but that's where we're trying to get to, is just being able to set those top ups appropriately across the piece based on real data about what is actually in EHCPs. Any other questions or comments? Sue.
Yeah, Sue, if you would like to ask a question. I think you're still muted.
Right, let's see if I've pressed the right button. Yes, you're smiling. There we go. So I think this is looking great. I am really, really encouraged. So that's my first observation. My second observation is a little more controversial and not particularly fact-based. But I have heard in the ether big numbers being bandied around on how much money is spent, for example, at tribunals. And wouldn't it be better if that money was spent on proper assessment and getting it right in the first place? And they are large sums of money. So my first observation is that perhaps there's a little bit of confidentiality perhaps needed because numbers get quoted out of context. And to your point of human behaviour, that then drives other people to think what I could do with that large amount of money if I managed to get my foot in the door at an early place. So I just felt it possibly inappropriate, but hey, that's me, to bring it to this forum to just say I urge confidentiality around the numbers, in the sense of how much it's costing council at the moment for tribunals, let's say, and how that information is shared, so that it doesn't create poor behaviours of people who may wish to get on the bandwagon and charge as much money as would fill the space they think might be available, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so I guess it depends. There's money going in lots of different directions. So some of that is around the local government ombudsman, around fines. Tribunals are about the decision coming out of the tribunal, which will direct expenditure, and there's also costs in relation to mediation. The straight, the short line answer to this is, if the system was working, none of those costs would feature. So effectively, what we're looking at is costs of failure.
Yes.
I mean, there's only we can't conceal facts like this. They're in the public domain because it's public money. So I think what I have been really impressed by has been, the perspective of parents from the SEND community who've joined us, and we've got Ruth here from the Parent Care Forum. They've put on some events, and we've had some absolutely fantastic engagement with parents of children with SEND, who are absolutely on board with a better system that suits everyone better, and makes better use of public money. So I have full confidence that our SEND parents will be on board with a better system. And in fact, we've had, I think, as of today, 189 responses to the consultation. Vast majority have been parents with really insightful contributions and a great deal of support for the direction of travel. So
and I think that's and it is absolutely brilliant. What I'm indelicately treading around the edges of saying is that there are sharks out there who will see an opportunity and perhaps try to influence things in a way that is better for them. I'm not saying parents, because that's not who it will be, who potentially would try and influence the system to make it advantageous for them. And we just need to be mindful that those things are perhaps happening out there.
Yeah, but I mean, I think it plays into the general point, Sue, which is, the way the SEND system is designed at the moment is not playing into the angels of our better nature. It's not,
absolutely.
It's leaving the door open to more negative outcomes. And just in looking at, for example, at price increases, if the market is not managed appropriately, then actually things can start, costs can start to rise because there's nothing holding them down.
Absolutely.
So we are in a space where we're not playing into the strongest kind of controls, but also kind of incentives for everyone to bring their most collaborative and best self to the table across a wide range of different roles and people. So I think that's what I'm saying in terms of how do we make a better system, is we start to put our ways of working into place with a really clear view about how do we make sure that we've got the right support, we've designed things so that people can bring their best selves to the table. We can share, we can build together, but also we can be mindful, just as you said, that unless we are, we're designing to in the right direction, we end up in the wrong direction. We are having conversations with the Department of Education, because some of the things in the system we don't have control over. They can only be dealt with by central government, but they've been very receptive. And we make a shout out to Sarah Dyke MP, who secured a debate in Parliament, which we contributed information to, and grateful for her drawing attention to the situation in Somerset.
And having done a little bit of work with Sarah will put the child at the centre of everything, and I think that's where we all want to get to. And it's very gratifying to hear that systems and procedures are put in place to, as you say, manage the market better, and ensure better value for money, but most importantly, better outcomes for our children and our families. So thank you for that.
Okay, Ruth Hobbs, we're running slightly over, but Ruth, hands up. You got your hand up there, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to make a point on this. It's a really delicate balance, isn't it? Because when we come to sharing information about finance, there will always be people who want to use that information for their own benefit. I suppose my concern is that if we are not transparent with the finance and we don't share that information, we know that there are particular groups within the SEND world that will do freedom of information requests and then put their own spin on that. So I think it's just about getting that balance. The one thing I would say that is heartening, Amelia, is when you've done the presentation today, you've talked about children that are not in education and you haven't highlighted just mainstream as an option. And I think that's one of the things that's coming back from our families is that whereas we would love all children to be in a mainstream education, we know that in some circumstances that's just not going to be feasible initially. So I think it's helpful to have that in the back of your mind when you're having those consultation conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we had the same conversation when we had, parents in the room. They're saying not every child is going to flourish in mainstream. Is this consultation about every child being in mainstream? Absolutely. We are not expecting that every child is going to be in a mainstream school. We have special schools. We have wonderful special schools. We have country leading special schools. And we fully expect that we always will do. But the trajectory we're on at the moment is on building more and more and more special schools, whereas actually what we can be doing is keeping some of those children in mainstream where they would be more appropriately educated. And I think our greatest concern is the children who are not anywhere. They're not in mainstream. They're not in special either. Actually, they're at home or they're on the street. I think that level of concern about the safety, well-being and progress of our children, it's absolutely not about saying we're going to get rid of special schools. Heaven help us, we could fill 2 more special schools tomorrow. The level of demand is so high. It's more about right-sizing our system so that children can be educated in the right place for them and recognizing the absolutely pivotal place and the aspiration. But also, I think, just not assuming that there's anything such thing as a special school child. There's every child could be in a mainstream or could be in special at any given time in their lives, including with really profound disabilities. And that's about not narrowing our horizons in terms of what children are capable of. I've gone over time, Simon, so I'll stop there.
No, it's fine. And I made an earlier error. So we had nobody who had any issues with the minutes, but we actually do need to formally vote the minutes in. So we'll do that now. Is everybody happy? All the members, if you're happy with the minutes from the previous meeting, could you please raise your virtual hands to show your agreement? Okay, and hands down. Anybody who abstains from that? And anybody in disagreement? No. Okay. Thank you very much for that. I'm sorry to have that item out of order. Right. We will then go to Richard, who's going to present on PFSA's future funding updates.
Hello. Good afternoon. Robin, would we be able to move on a couple of slides, please? Thank you. Whilst we're doing that, so I'll just say that we are making some good progress on sustaining and improving the PFSA service at the moment. So parent family support advisors, as you all know, is a really, really super important layer of early help. That's really vital to obviously children and families, but also schools, the council and health services as well. Feedback that we've received from schools, Robin, it hasn't gone forward, but
it's gone forward on mine.
Okay, it's there now. Thank you. So feedback from schools was that the formula that we've been using to allocate PFSA funding is outdated. And I think I mentioned last time it was put together about 12 years ago using historic roll data. I think free school meals and indices of deprivation as well. So we are planning to consult soon on a new formula that will use deprivation and number of pupils on roll. It has to be school's choice about how that's set up, because what we'll find is that there are winners and losers from that consultation, and that will have implications for employment as well. So important that schools kind of have a free, transparent say about exactly how that should be set up, but we'll try and put that out relatively soon. And obviously we'll inform Schools Forum members about that. There is some good news. So we think we've, subject to the usual decision-making processes and members' views, we think we've secured sufficient funding for next school year, for 2025-2026, from the historic commitment of schools' contribution to pay for PFSAs at the same level as we're paying for them this year. And that payment would be made around August 2025. So I hope everyone's happy about that. And also it'd be really good to share that with PFSA. Sometimes they feel like they're a little bit battered and alone, and funding decisions come through late. So I'm hoping that that supports them. Looking ahead, we're really keen to agree in principle the funding for subsequent years as well, so that the service is sustained on the long term. Ideally, we'd want to see an increased spend, as demand is really high at the moment, but that will be subject to lots of conversations that we'll need to have, and also to thinking through, how much money that Schools Forum suggests that is put into the pot as well. It's good news as well. We're speaking with senior CAMS colleagues who are really interested in how we align the service between the PFSAs and the mental health in schools teams, and how we fund that together as well. So we are looking at that joint funding and the possibility of pulling that together. It's still in discussion, as funding decisions tend to be towards the end of the financial year. And as we discussed last year, we'll need to increase the proportion of contribution from schools through DSG. That's matched funding between the schools' contributions with council and potentially NHS spend. And if we increase the school's contribution more quickly, then that would mitigate some of that impact of the winners and losers from the formula change as well. So again, that's something we'll bring to Schools Forum in the future to consider. Finally, I also wanted to say that we'll bring the detail as soon as possible, but obviously it's quite tricky at the moment to set these things out and align financial processes, and especially in the current financial climate, which I'm sure you appreciate. I wanted to talk as well. I wrote to heads last school year about details about how we're supporting PFSAs, and you'll be hopefully aware that there's lots in place at the moment. So lots of training that we're planning to set up, and I think the first big session starting on Monday next week. So there'll be a series of kind of face-to-face and online training that's made available to PFSAs. Also, since the spring or summer, the Connect Somerset champions have been hosting kind of groups between PFSAs. It can feel like a lonely job, so that's peer support, shared learning is really important for them, and we've had really good feedback from those. And we've put some group supervision in place recently as well, that's run by the Family Intervention Service. It doesn't change that line management responsibility that schools have responsibility for, but it's a really positive step to help PFSAs with their caseloads and risk management as well, and that sort of coaching that can be really helpful for staff in those positions. And then finally, we're working on extending the case management system that we have at the moment for FIS and for social care, so that PFSAs would be able to log in and use that same case management system and see some of the similar data as well. That would eventually roll out to the whole early help system across schools and voluntary community sector, and would be a really big step forward for us in Somerset to kind of have that shared data, shared information, but also the quality assurance that comes with that, the sort of recording and information sharing that you get from a shared case management system across the whole early help. So we're aiming to put that in place for PFSAs from the beginning of next calendar year. We'll see how that goes, but that's the current ambition. So I think overall, I really want you to appreciate how important PFSAs are to the council and how much we're trying to support and put this in place, sustain the funding, and look long term as well about how the service develops. So that's the end of my kind of little PFSA bit. I did want to give a bit of a shout out for Transform Family View as well. We've got a new platform that means that we're calling it Transform Family View. It gives quite a different view in terms of sort of visual timelines and things like that. Really helpful for your staff. The data is more consistently up to date as well, and it includes the virtual team around the school contacts. And hopefully this week or last week we're adding NEETs. So for children not in employment, educational training, the risk of NEET scores and guidance will be there from Bath University as well. So you've kind of got the Transform app, you've got the risk score for a child, but also guidance about the things to do to support that child or young person. So most schools should be on Transform Family View already. They are already on Transform Family View, but some aren't. So if you're not, then there should be training sessions available as well. And we'll put some details in the school newsletter later in the week. So I will pause there for questions. But yeah, Simon, if you've got anything to add or ask, then please do.
No, it's very clear, Richard. Any questions? No, in which case, thank you very much. And we will move on to the early years block report. Phil Curd.
I thought it was me. Sorry, Simon.
Oh, well, it says Phil Curd on it. It's item 9.
It's definitely not the early years block report. That definitely is Phil, but I think that might be next in our slides.
I've missed one. Principles for NF disbursement, including those. Apologies, I'm very clearly distracted.
This section's a bit technical and a bit difficult, so don't blame me for trying to skip it. So just to give a bit of background on this. So as those of you who were on Schools Forum back in January might remember, we had to have several emergency Schools Forum meetings just to agree the distribution of the schools block for 2024-25. And I think what we'd like to do this year is sort of start that process a bit earlier, and hopefully give Schools Forum a bit of education, a bit of sort of background information about how schools block works, and talk about the possible options for balancing the schools block should we need to for 2025-26. We haven't actually had, I don't think, any announcements yet from government on schools funding. Normally we get one in July, but obviously we've got a new government, so that might be delayed, and these conversations might change depending on things like the budget, which is later this month. But what I'd like to do is just sort of give some high level information really about the schools block, and we would like to pick it up again hopefully on our CPD session, which is planned for November. So I don't know if you want to move on, but thank you. So just on the first slide, I just wanted to refer everybody to our schools funding and accountancy team page on the Support Services for Education website. And there's loads of different documents on there, but there is one specific document I just wanted to refer to, which is called Budget Funding Statement Guidance. That gives quite a lot of sort of technical background and information about how the national funding formula works. Again, I mean, as I said already, it's quite technical, and I haven't been in education for that long, and I don't profess to understand all the detail behind it, but I do have a good team behind me, and particularly Jackie, who understands the sort of technical detail. So that's just to refer you to where sort of more information can be found. One sort of critical part of this is that the funding we receive from the Department of Education is based on a census that is a year behind the census on which we have to actually give it out. So for example, for 2024-25, we received the funding based on the October 22 census, but then we have to give it out based on the October 23 census. And quite a lot, as you probably know yourselves, can change between those two census dates, and we can therefore end up with a gap. And there are lots of factors involved in that, which are just on the next slide. And at the bottom, I've just again referred to the national fund, how the national funding formula is calculated, and that the DfE use it to allocate the money to the local authority. So I don't know if you just want to move on. So these are some examples of the factors that are used in the school census to provide the funding to local authorities. And as I mentioned, these factors can change each year, and they can sometimes result in a difference between the funding we get and the funding we have to give out. So, for example, deprivation might increase, and we need to, in certain areas of the county, give out more money than we actually end up receiving because deprivation has increased over that 12-month period. This list is not comprehensive. It doesn't include everything. We can go through some more of the detail perhaps when we do the sort of CPD session. But some examples, as well as deprivation, things like the proportion of children with English as an additional language, the proportion of children that get free school meals, a calculation based on attainment of children in the school. And we have a sparsity factor, which is to do with sort of small rural schools that local authorities might have in their areas. So what we're allowed to do is give out money in a range at the moment. And over the last few years, the sort of range which we're allowed to give out the money has been slowly reducing as the Department for Education moved to what I've called here a hard national funding formula. And that's where the DfE basically say you must give out, just an example, £600 to each school for the deprivation factor, and so that flexibility might continue to reduce, and that's what we're expecting. But at the moment, we do have some flexibility on these individual factors to calculate funding. As well as this, there is actually a compulsory minimum funding per pupil level, which we must give to all schools. And we use this calculator, which Jackie and my team knows inside out, called the Authority Pro Forma tool. It's a huge spreadsheet with, I don't know, about 30 tabs. And this is what we use to sort of do our calculations for the schools, and we use to do any modelling we might need to do to balance the schools block. And we have to balance the schools block. There's no overspending. We must give out what we receive. We can't give out any more. Okay, to move on. This is just a slide to talk a bit more about the things that we have done in Somerset for 24-25, and these are all things that we can do, but we may or may not choose to do depending on what funding we have. So in the sort of calculator by school, there is quite often a gain that each school will get, and that might vary considerably between schools depending on how those factors are in each of the schools. So schools that have increased deprivation may see a higher gain than schools with lower deprivation in their areas, and we can on a school by school or overall set a cap on these gains, but we decided not to do that. But I think that often sort of deprives those schools that have low attainment or high deprivation or high numbers of children with English as an additional language. It would affect those schools more adversely. So we haven't done that in 24-25. We also have this thing called a minimum funding guarantee increase, and this basically allows schools to have a small increase or an increase that is definite by school. So some schools may not see an increase in their calculator. We can set that between 0 and 0.5%, and for 24-25 we actually set that in our calculator at 0.5%. So another thing we're allowed to do is use the growth fund, which is a separate sort of pot of money to top up the school's funding, and we did that in 24-25 to help us balance the school's block, and we used about £600,000 of the growth fund to help us do that. And without that, we would have had to cut some of the other factors to make it balance. So we decided to do that. The other thing we can do is use the schools block for other things. So Richard just mentioned we drew a small amount from the schools block last year for the PFSAs. We are also allowed to transfer up to 0.5% of the schools block to the high needs block. And again, in Somerset, we've not done that, and we continue, I guess, not to do that, or we haven't done that historically. So those are the sort of things we did in Somerset last year. Okay. So just to recap, for 24-25, we proposed various different ways to balance the schools block, and we all agreed in the end, we supported by Schools Forum, that we would reduce this ARPU, which is called the age-related weighting per pupil, and that I think gave us the fairest reduction we felt across individual schools. And we had to reduce that by 0.77% in order to balance the national funding formula for 24-25. I mentioned this already, but what we would like to do is we have a session in November to actually walk through the impact of the national funding formula for one particular school, if everybody's happy to do that. We'll try not to make it too dry, and to show the actual impact of all these different aspects of the funding formula and how it might impact one particular school. I think I mentioned this already, but what we'd also like to do is agree some principles to balance the NFF in advance of the January APT calculations. I think we definitely, as officers, would like to avoid all those sort of emergency meetings if possible, although obviously we may need to do some modelling if there is a gap, but I think it would help if we had an agreement on that prior to getting to January 2025. So I'll just pause there in case anybody wants to ask anything about the calculations and about the NFF. We'll just briefly cover notional SEN. Okay.
Susan Fielden.
Thank you. Just thinking about your last point about the proposals to balance the NFF, it's theoretically possible that we could have more money than
it is. Yes, it is.
So we would presumably need to agree an approach if we've got more and if we've got less.
I think that's a very good point. Yes, that's a good point. Thank you. Okay, so I'll just cover off notional SEN. So just another slide on notional SEN funding. So notional SEN funding is calculated within our APT calculator on a school by school basis, and just to reiterate that it is part of the school's funding, it's part of the school's block, and it's not extra funding, unfortunately. And there are, as with the NFF, lots of different factors or several factors that we can use to apply within our calculator to calculate the notional SEN funding. And the notional SEN funding, from my understanding, is to give a school's guidance on what should be spent or what could be spent on SEN children, and on their sort of education within the school. So we've got this calculator, which I think we've been using very similar factors for the last few years, and it's not something we've reviewed over the last couple of years, but we have a budget of 12.7% of the schools on average of each of the schools' budgets in 24-25 that we've sort of but set aside for SEN funding. And that's compared to an average of 11.5%, which is actually the 2023 average. So we are at a slightly higher rate in Somerset. And again, this is something that is quite a technical area, and we're happy to cover it in a bit more detail on a sort of face-to-face CPD session, which I think makes sense to me, rather than trying to get into the detail on the actual Schools Forum meeting. So if that's something everybody's happy with, we will put that forward for the November session. Okay, that's it for that section.
Thank you very much.
I don't know if anyone's got any comments or anything. But
yeah, are there any questions? No, in which case we will go in the correct order now to the year's block report. Phil Curd.
Good afternoon, Simon. Good afternoon, everybody. Just bringing a item for information relating to the centrally retained funding from our early years block. So just giving you an overview of the centrally retained funding itself and some of the key services or support that funding has brought in for this financial year. So it's a kind of midterm report And for context, this will go to Early Years Partnership on the 9th of October, and at that point the sector or the sector representatives get to kind of scrutinise the offer with the service leads too. So by way of an overview, each year we currently retain 3% of the early years funding block, and that covers a range of costs related to services which support the operation of the early years system in Somerset. In 24-25, the funding was increased to just over £1.4 million. In previous years, a proportion of the funding was passed to external partners and bodies who delivered various services, training and CPD activities to providers. This year, we've retained a greater proportion of the funding to cover the cost of services provided by the council, offsetting a number of council budgets. So following consultation with the sector, and that was led by the Early Years Partnership, the key focus areas of support were subsidised access to qualifications, good quality training in CPD, building confidence around SEND, sustainability funding and safeguarding support. But that doesn't cover all of the areas that we funded, but they are the key ones. So what we have now is a slide that just kind of presents a summary of what each of those areas is doing in a kind of midterm report. I won't go word for word, and people are very welcome to kind of read this at their leisure. But in terms of subsidised qualifications, got off to a bit of a late start. There was a change of staff within the skill team, but they're playing catch up, and most of the delivery will be this term and again after Christmas. So very much playing a catch up. So in terms of the training that providers need and making sure we're securing that as cheaply as possible and passing on significant subsidies to providers, we've got child protection update training for childminders, basic awareness cascade packs, introduction to child protection, paediatric first aid, safer recruitment, and the safer recruitment refresher. And some of that is face-to-face and some of that is virtual, and we're trying to keep the costs down for providers in terms of releasing staff. We have also secured weekend slots for much of the safeguarding training, so if members of staff can't be released through the working week, they are able to access some of that training over the weekends too. Next slide, please. So training in CPD, this is delivered under Alison Jeffrey's service. So you can see April to August, this is all the training that's been delivered to 106 attendees. So preparing for inspections, meaningful maths, enabling environments, raising quality, childminder training and teacher training at SKIT. And then September, December, so what's planned for this coming term, we've got the roles and responsibilities of management committees, self-evaluation and quality interaction. Then we've got some bite-sized training webinars, EYFS, the 3 I's, so intent, implementation and impact, supporting prime or specific areas of learning and childminder training. Then confidence around SEND focuses on the service delivered by Rebecca Fisk. So this is an overview of what they delivered in the last year, because their data isn't available mid-year, but that's something that we are working on with the service to improve. But there's kind of little snippets of feedback there, but they had 330 new referrals for advisory support, 531 individual children supported by the team and by the advisory team in settings. 365 children received early years high needs funding in 172 settings. And then you can see they had 182 responses from settings regarding the support that had been delivered. And in terms of that, the most popular feedback said that increased adults' understanding of SEND systems, increased knowledge of available resources, increased adult confidence to meet need, increased staff awareness of the graduated response to SEN, SEN, and children making progress with their target support plan targets. In terms of portage and family support, so 119 new referrals for portage, so 70 children or 58% received home intervention. 100% of parents who responded would recommend to others, and 100% of children made progress. Safeguarding support. So this is delivered by Beth Olive and Catherine Hollinghurst, and they cover the whole county, including our school as well. So they attend the fortnightly early years team meetings and half-termly early years improvement panel to highlight safeguarding concerns and advise colleagues with safeguarding queries from settings they are working with. 16 providers have received intensive support where safeguarding concerns have been identified through that process. That includes visits, action plans, ongoing communication, liaison with Ofsted, and follow-up to ensure that safeguarding practices and have been fully embedded. They've designed and implemented an early years specific complaints tracker for internal use, and that supports setting knowledge and identifies recurring themes. They've created templates and a model safeguarding policy for providers to adapt and adopt. Established terminally early years specific DSL briefings. The first briefing was in May, and that was attended by 69 delegates from 58 providers, and that was 13 childminders and 45 early years settings. Created an early years safeguarding audit separate from the one for childminders, and separate ones for childminders and settings, to enable providers to self-evaluate the practice and ensure that they are compliant with EYFS requirements. Themes from the analysis of the audit will influence future content of DSL briefings and training to raise sector confidence and ensure best practice. And then from both audits, there are similar themes emerging. ESLs are supporting some specific settings who identified that they had larger numbers of actions. Model policies are being made available on intimate care and the use of restrictive physical interventions. At the next early years DSL briefing on the 1st of October, which was yesterday, focus on early help processes and how to access support through the front door. Sustainability funding. So this sits in one of my service areas and it's overseen by Sarah Love in Education Places Strategy. So for this financial year, we have a budget of £350,000 to support providers that have quite acute financial issues. To date, we have received 6 applications, of which 5 were deferred from the previous year. We have received 5 completed applications so far this year, all requested the maximum award of £10,000. 3 have received reduced awards, 1 has received the full 10,000 and 1 has received no award at all. Of the 4 providers who awarded grants, 3 are voluntary providers and 1 is a private provider. So far, 22,975 has been awarded this year. Grants have ranged between 3,000 and 10,000, and we would expect more applications to come in later in this calendar year and then the early part of next year. Any funding from the sustainability pot that isn't allocated in year is then redistributed to providers through the end of year adjustment.
Okay, is that the end of your section, Phil?
That is my last slide, Simon. Yes, so happy to take any questions. I'm conscious that I am just covering slides for services that aren't here today, but partners within early years will be able to kind of scrutinise those services and the impact and effectiveness of their delivery at partnership next week.
Sue Seeley.
Hi, Phil. So before I get really excited, because that all sounds massively positive, is there a baseline that we are measuring or you are measuring those numbers against, or can you offer an opinion in the narrative as to whether that is an improved impact delivered by this, or whether it's the same, or whether it's gone backwards? Just before I get really excited. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think on the whole, it's much improved. So if we think about the process in its entirety, this is where we've gone to the sector and said, we retain this money, but how do you think we should use it to best effect? So we've designed a package around the preferences of the sector. Now, things like this is the Subsidised qualifications, they have been late in starting, but actually we will turbocharge that programme and roll out lots of low-cost qualifications that are vital to the running of settings over the next 6 months. So I think that's a vast improvement on where we are. The training and CPD offer, I think, was already of good quality, but now we've got that kind of central oversight and coordination that's probably better than where it was. The confidence around Send and Rebecca Fisk's service, I think, has improved year on year. And what we have is last year's data. And at the end of this year, we'll be able to look back and compare like for like and see what that tells us from a quantitative point of view. In terms of the sustainability funding, there is more funding available this year. And we will have to wait until the end of the year to see if it's fully deployed or not. And that will inform how much maybe we set aside next year. But anything we don't use is returned to providers through the end of year adjustment. And I think the safeguarding support that's offered by Beth and Catherine is noticeably improved. There's a real early years focus, which might have not been there before, but they work incredibly hard to cover all elements of the education sector. So I think that's a vast improvement.
And that's brilliant. And that was what I'm hoping you would say. So thank you to all involved. I certainly have had some positive feedback from my early years settings. And I think you're absolutely right with the CPD offer. It takes a little bit of time for people to hook on to the fact that it's there, what it is and how good it is. But well done, everybody. And thank you for that.
Thank you. I'll pass that back.
That's great. I've got a quick question. It kind of cuts across the training and the safeguarding. Clearly, there's an increased cost to that intensive support. I think it was 16 institutions you were talking about. Is there any, and you might not be able to answer this now, but it's that kind of question where obviously I think it was 58 providers attended their safeguarding briefings. You know, is there a link between people who don't attend these briefings and people you end up going in and spending more time and more effort in terms of intensive support? And to what extent there's kind of a proactive approach to ensure better attendance at these or the safeguarding training elements?
Yeah, it's a good question, Simon, and I don't have the answers to hand because it's not one of my services that delivers it, but it's a question that I will ask in my capacity of chair of partnership next week. And it's the kind of analysis that we used to do of our wider safeguarding functions. So understand which schools would come to DSL briefings and which schools we were putting significant amounts of support into, and understanding if there was a correlation. But yes, we had, I think looking back at that slide, there were 69 delegates from 58 providers. For context, we have in the region of 450 providers. So we're not getting full coverage or full attendance from the sector by any means. So I know the team will look at how we improve attendance, including moving those sessions around to make it more accessible for providers.
No, that's great. Thank you, Phil. Susan Fielden.
Thank you. I think I've just found the answer to my question. I'm really interested in this report. Thank you for it, particularly given that we were uncomfortable earlier on in the year at the increase in central spending and the refinancing of some existing funds. And I think it's just been really powerful to see how you've targeted the services to the needs of the sector. I was thinking ahead for next year, but I've just seen looking ahead on the agenda to the forward plan that we will be covering the forward year funding proposals at the next meeting, because I think getting in early would be really valuable to start those conversations, so we don't have the hiccup that we had last year. And I was just wondering whether the expansion of the early years offer to parents is likely to be making a difference to the needs of the sector and the central spending. But as I say, I've answered my own question. You're going to address that next time.
Thanks, Susan.
Amelia.
Yeah, I was just going to very briefly on the question about baseline, and obviously one of the things that we were wrestling with, as you said, Susan, when we were trying to get to the point of agreeing the forward programme, was how are we going to hold how are we and local authority going to be held to account? So I think one of the things that we agreed at that point was we need to have a more comprehensive view of impact, including establishing baselines. And I think it's in terms of us being, as Phil said, have a sharper program. We're really clear what the sector is asking for, what is being delivered, tracking that impact, and establishing both a baseline and then trajectories going forward. I think one of the things we initially struggled with was just not having that baseline, and that's now something that we'll be able to track over time. Which I think will just make the program go from strength to strength.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? No, in which case we will go to item 10, DSG outturn.
It's me again. Okay, I just apologise in advance. It's not got much good news in it, this section, but just to cover off what the DSG year-end outturn was for 2023-24, and then I'll just talk to you a bit about the current year forecast. So just firstly, just to say that we are in a deficit position overall on our DSG. And that is largely because of the overspend on the high needs block, and the overspend on the high needs block for the last financial year was £15.1 million, and that represents 20.5% of our £73.5 million budget. And we now have a closing deficit on the DSG of £36 million. And that is forecast to continue growing. I don't know if, I presume you sort of see the headlines in the media, but I think across the country there's something like 3.2 billion of deficits on DSG blocks across all local authorities. So it's a significant and growing problem across the country, and we are not at the moment in the government's scheme, the safety valve scheme. We have been taking part in the what was called the DBV, the Delivering Better Value scheme, which gave us a small pot of funding, but we're not at the moment in the sort of in the higher risk sort of group. But we shall see what happens in the future. So that's just to cover the outturn. This slide just gives you a flavour of month 4. So we actually set a budget for 2024-25 with an forecast in-year deficit of 18.9 million on the funding of 77.4 million. And as you can see from the table, month 4 we were forecasting to overspend by 24.3 million pounds on the budget of 77.4, so a significant overspend. I think Robin, if you click on, there's might be some bits that maybe pop up on the side. Yeah, so just to highlight the two significant areas of overspend. So on the budget that says INMS and pre-16, that's independent, non-maintained school placements. I've also put another acronym there, that's DMP. So that's our deficit management plan, which we used as our budget for 2024-25. So we expected when we set that back in January of this year that we would have an average number of placements of 415 across the current financial year, and our forecast as of month 4 is 449, and those placements at the moment are costing the local authority an average of £68,000 at our last estimate. So very easily you can see how we get a huge amount of expenditure on that line, and that figure is continuing to grow and may continue to increase throughout the rest of the year. And the other line on which we have a significant overspend is on our mainstream top up and costed plans, and it's apparent that we actually have still got a continued growth in the number of children getting EHCPs. That's continued to rise. I think we have a further 300 from that budgeted number that we've identified this year. And we've also got, there's a small shift in sort of increased need, and there is a continued growth in also the number of costed plans. And those are the things we use to sort of top up children with the HCPs to give schools additional funding to provide their education. So those are the main reasons for the additional cost and continued pressure on the high needs block. That's where we are. Okay, I don't know if there's any questions or anything. Any comments? Quite big numbers.
Yeah, and it's a direction of travel that's been consistent for a very long time. Yeah. Amelia.
Yeah, I would just reflect in relation to what we were talking about earlier and the proposal around equalising the banding for state mainstream and state special. What you can see there is that the growth in expenditure in line 4 mainstream top-up and costed plans is at 3.3 million at this point in the year already. So when we're talking about putting in the region of 3 to 4 million in each year through equalised banding, that expenditure is going to go into the system anyway under the current system. But there is it's going in with increased workload, financial uncertainty, and the ramifications of that. So effectively, what we're talking about is the money is going to go into the system anyway. It's going in a difficult way that's adding pressure. So looking about doing that in a more a simpler, more rational way. It's not actually about spending more money. It's about spending our money in a way that potentially drives better outcomes. So you can kind of see just the quantum there that's involved in what's already going in this year.
Thank you. Any other points about this item? No, in which case we'll move on to item 11, FMS consultation update.
It's me again with Joe O'Callaghan. So we have decided we're going to do a refresher, sort of rewrite of our financial management scheme, which we've been sort of just touching up around the edges really for the last couple of years. So we have had an initial sort of workshop internally to have a look at the things that we'd like to change and update. And I haven't got the papers open, but there was a page within the pack that had a little table of all the things that we're planning to update and work on over the next month or two. So I mean, essentially what we'd like to do is refresh the scheme to improve it, make it easier to read, and to make it more relevant to the way we do things in Somerset. And I think some of those things are sort of lift and shift out of the DfE guidance, which is actually what a lot of it does need to be. But there are also a limited amount of references to the way we do things, so we'd like to add those things in. And we've had a good trawl through other local authority schemes and hopefully taking the sort of best bits of those and using those to design a new scheme. So it won't look hugely different in some parts, but some parts will change dramatically. So, for example, we'd like to take out some sections, some of which have grown over time. And I think we have guidance on some of these bits elsewhere in other documentation. So, for example, I think there's a sort of a big section on energy. We'd like to remove most of that. We also want to put in some more information about academisation, how that works in Somerset. So those are two examples of things we'd like to take out and to make it more readable. So there's also a list of policies we want to add in and clarify. So we would like to put something in about capitalisation policies and some capital revenue guidance. I think some of that exists in SIP for guidance, but we'd like to enhance that. We'd like to expand the policies on school deficits. So I'm sure some of you be aware, for our local authority maintained schools, we've sort of had a bit more of a formal approach to sending out letters asking for deficit recovery plans, and we just want to make sure that section adequately documents how we do things and what we expect from schools, I suppose. So we'll be working on updating that. There is we want to put some more information about the core offer policy. I don't know whether Joe O'Callaghan wants to say anything about that, but we're going to have a look at the wording around how how schools buy into the core offer and options to opt out, those sorts of things. So we need to just look over the wording of that, and we'll work on that. We don't think there's any clarity on what insurance cover schools are getting from the local authority, so we want to provide some clear information on that, and particularly what that our insurance cover doesn't cover. We need to have another look at interest on school balances policy. We'd like to expand that again to how we do things in Somerset. I think there is some statutory requirements from the DfE, so we'll be working on that and just expanding that a bit further. And then the VA, the voluntary aided schools policies, we need to have a bit of review of those just to make sure they're up to date and everything that should be in there is in there. So that I think that more or less covers what we're proposing to work on. There may be some other things. There needs to be a consultation for the FMS as well. Sorry, you can move on to the next one. There needs to be a consultation for the FMS. So this is our proposed timetable, timescale that we'd like to bring a revised document back to Schools Forum. So we have shared with you now sort of headline changes that we'd like to make. There's work going on in the background now to rewrite the scheme, which I'm hopeful we will get done prior to the 27th of November meeting, depending on other commitments. But the team is hoping to work on that over the next few weeks. We then need to move into a consultation phase. So we intend to consult in January 2025, which will be, I think, 6 weeks. So that'll take us to the middle of February time. And then sort of looking at the feedback on that consultation, we'll revise things where necessary and bring them back to the meeting on the 5th of March 2025 with the intention of having a new policy by the 1st of April 25. So that's the current plan anyway. But if anybody has any questions on that or comments.
Yeah, Joe, I was just going to add, sorry, it's Joe O'Callaghan, Education
Yep.
Operations.
Perfect.
Just the fact that, we have just been operating on an interim policy, haven't we, for the last 2 years. And the whole point is just to really give it thorough scrutiny, make it more easy to read, understand, and really clearly lay out the way we do things in Somerset. And lots has changed in recent years with, moving away from dedelegated, moving forward with the core offer. Lots of queries came up when we were having those core offer discussions around VA status and, what was written in our financial management scheme. So it really is a complete rewrite and going through it page by page, and in line with this timescale, so that the next published policy is hopefully more fit for purpose. But obviously that's the point of a consultation, to make sure that the LA Maintained schools are happy with what we're proposing.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? No, in which case we will go to item 12, which is CPD items for our meeting 27th of November.
I think there was one question, actually. Somebody just put the hand up.
Oh, I was too fast or slow.
Sorry, Simon, it's the well-disguised Sue Simpson again. Only to say, with the budget being at the end of this month, have you built in a bit of, oh dearie me, we weren't expecting that time? Because we all know things like that could change quite significantly. And whilst the changes that you've proposed, I'm very happy, that doesn't mean that somebody in Westminster isn't going to do something bad.
That's true. Yes, I think we'll have to wait and see what that brings, to be honest.
I'd think about your deadlines.
Yeah, we might have to revise those.
Yeah.
I'll let Amelia come in. Amelia's got her hand up, so she might have something to add on that.
She'll know the answer.
She knows more than I do about the budget.
I definitely haven't got a hotline into number 10. I can promise you that. But what I would say is, if people are anxious about what's coming out in the budget, the informal feedback we've had from contacts and friends in high places who sit on various government groups and bodies and things, is that the noises are in the right direction financially, not the wrong direction. And there are various things that we are quite concerned about, that are, for example, early help, where it sounds like all the right noises are being made. Now, that is literally just rumor and happenstance. This is on the grapevine stuff, but the grapevine is feeling cautiously optimistic, is what I would say. So I agree, we should just be mindful that, it's a big budget, and there's a lot riding on it. But I think we are, just quietly behind the scenes, the sounds we're getting are positive ones rather than scary ones, if that helps.
Yeah, it's always good if you don't have to completely rewrite everything, because it just went pear-shaped with 3 weeks to go.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also it seems like we're hearing good sounds about on the cost side of things, like teachers' pay, with them getting these things out much earlier and enabling us all to budget. I think this is going to make life a lot more straightforward, I would hope. Right, CPD items for November 27th.
Yep, Simon, that's me, I believe. Obviously, school forum meetings used to be face-to-face, and most of them are now online, but our meeting on the 27th of November for schools forum is actually face-to-face. So we thought we'd take the opportunity and tag on a session of CPD in the morning. So we've actually booked Braunton House in Taunton for 10 o'clock, and lunch will be provided. And it's obviously in the schools forum operational and good practice guidance that we do CPD. And I think the last time we did any CPD for school forums member was probably February time 2023, so it's been quite a while. It obviously helps upskill members and make sure they can make effective decisions when decisions need to take place, and obviously a really good opportunity to share knowledge and expertise amongst the members. Now, we can obviously propose some of the things. Joe's mentioned it a couple of times today, that we'd quite like to go into more detail around the national funding formula, notional send, go through a worked example with members, possibly use the opportunity, certainly because we've got some new members that have joined this term, around roles and responsibilities. But we are really open to anything anybody wants to put forward as saying we would really appreciate some CPD in this area. So Robin's kindly agreed to coordinate any responses, just sent to the schools forum usual email before half term, please, so the 25th of October. But yeah, it will be a couple of hours in the morning, have some lunch before we go into the formal schools forum meeting in the afternoon.
Yeah, that's great, and it's very welcome. We've managed to put this together, so my thanks to the LA representatives and Robin for managing to put this in place. I think it's going to be a great opportunity, and it'd be love to see you all in face rather than virtual, given with new members, some of us have never met in person. So please do get those in. Any questions about that? No, in which case that brings our meeting to a close. So we will hold that meeting on the 27th with an earlier start for CPD, an in-person meeting. And I look forward to seeing you all. And please do contact that email if you want to kind of drive key elements on the agenda. Oh, before I cut across, Susan, I just spotted a hand up.
Thank you. I don't know quite how I found it, but it might have been on the original agenda, but there was a forward plan for the schools forum. And I just wanted to ask a question about whether when the consultation response and any discussion about the actual top-up rates and banding funding for high needs would come back to the forum, because it didn't seem to be on the plan. But I don't know whether I can't think how I got hold of it. Whether it was on the original agenda.
That's a good shout, Susan. I don't know if it's on the forward plan. I think our timescale for the consultation came slightly after we put together the forward plan, so it's possible we haven't put all of those in, but it was certainly be expecting to come back to the next meeting with the outcome of the consultation and the full business case.
Thank you.
Right, in which case we will bring the meeting to a close, and thanking you all and thanking Robin for administering the meeting.
Thanks, Simon.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.